So another round of applause to all of you in the room for a fantastic day yesterday. And we have a lot more in store today. So in many ways, you can say that today is about the future of our institutions and the future of the sector. So we will be looking at institution building and technology pretty closely today. To set context and to share some opening thoughts, may I call upon Alkesh?
Thank you, everyone. It's a pleasure for me to be here. I'm not a WASH expert, but I can only stand in awe of what all of you have done over the last few years. It's, for me, just amazing that literally a few years back, there was nothing really in terms of urban treatment of fecal sludge. And now there's a policy, there's so much traction. Various governments have actually taken ownership and started working, right from Andhra Pradesh to Telangana to Orissa to Maharashtra and recently even UP. And I'm sure I'm missing out other states as well. And this is not only in FSTPs, I think it's in the whole value chain, right from FSTPs to co-treatment to city sanitation plans. So for me, it's just amazing what's happened. And as I think about this, I can't help but reflect what's the journey ahead going to be. And for me, the journey ahead is going to be even more exciting. And I say that because of a couple of reasons. The first is just doing what all the announcements that have been made and all the money that's been committed by the governments, just executing that is a huge, huge challenge in my view. And I think it's for the reasons that many of you said, that this is not an infrastructure story. While building FSTPs or doing the co-treatment is important, it is at the end of the day a service business. So just doing that is going to be complex. And the way you'll have to do business for me, I think will be slightly different from what you've been doing in the past. The second reason is what Madhu has been saying and is the theme of this workshop, which is the communication and amplification. And we have to find models which might again be slightly different on how communications can be one part of amplification, and amplification will go beyond communication to go beyond the 5 states we are focused on and how we can drive that part. Before I come to what I think some of the challenges are around these two themes, what I'd like to do is just draw on, give you a sense of what we are doing in our other areas in poverty alleviation. Madhu had specifically asked me to share with you some of those details and how that might apply here. Our poverty alleviation program consists of 4 areas really. One is agriculture, where we work with smallholder farmers to try and increase productivity and income. We work specially with women because that really is perhaps where the most vulnerabilities lie. We work in gender, and in gender it's about economic empowerment and social empowerment. We would work a lot through self-help groups. We work in, of course, sanitation and in financial inclusion. In financial inclusion, the goal is to see that how, say, 70% of Indians could be financially included in the sector, not only having bank accounts, but using them regularly. So it's a large portfolio, and in all these, the common element is that we'd like to try and have some system change. Because only if you have sustainable system change can you aspire to make large changes, which is what all of you are trying to do in WASH. And we think that to have system change, we really need to do 5 elements. And I'm just going to take you through those 5 elements and say how that applies to WASH and other sectors. So really those 5 elements, it's kind of like a stack, and starts from the bottom, which says you have to have inclusive policies, new technologies, infrastructure, applications, and behavior change. These are the 5. So I'll just quickly go through all 5 and say how it applies here. So inclusive policies are, for example, what you are doing, that there should be a policy for fecal sludge management. In financial inclusion, it was, for example, that there could be new policies that bring down the cost of serving the poor, and the government of India has launched payment banks, which are a different way of serving the poor using mobile telephones and telephony just using mobiles to open accounts, transact, etc., through digital financial services. And that really is the base. So unless you have the right policies, it's really tough to make a progress. And I think I would say, India is already there now with FSM to a large extent. In general, my view is that actually India has typically very good policies, and the issue is not so much about policies. And even where India doesn't have policies, with concerted effort, India does get good policies. I'll just give you a very small example. I spent a decade of my life working in HIV/AIDS. The crux there was to work with sex workers and men who have sex with men, and injecting drug users. These are all vulnerable populations that get affected by the epidemic and help fuel the epidemic. And India was one of the few countries, even when Section 377 was valid and even when MSM were outlawed, did not actually said our national program will work with these three groups and put a lot of money into these three groups. Many countries didn't. India is a country that actually did not criminalize sex work. It still doesn't criminalize sex work. So in a way, our laws are pretty liberal, they are pretty good. Our policies are also often very decent. The challenge is often after the policies, what do you do next and how do you implement, the lack of capacity, the lack of seriousness to implement, etc. So the policy part, in WASH you didn't have a policy. I think the great work all of you have done has helped to have a good policy, and I think I'd say we are 80% there in terms of policies. The next is new technologies, and in every area, if you can get in new technologies, you can maybe bring down cost 10 times, maybe help execution 10 times faster, 10x. And I think you've done that here again in sanitation. Again, pretty amazing that in such a short period of time, so many states are like, yes, we understand co-treatment, we understand FSTPs, and we are willing to put money in it. And in such a short period of time, for 5 state governments to have committed so much money for FSTPs and co-treatment is, I think, amazing. And I think all of you deserve a big round of applause for all this. It's just amazing. In other fields too, we look at new technologies. An example is, say, BT Maze, which we are helping to drive worldwide. So there are many areas of technologies and vaccines and other areas that we think are important. Technology also could be just like IT backbone that could have drive stuff. So, but I think the crux is that often kickstarts a new way of working. And for us, it's very important. And the way that you all have taken this so seriously, I think, is just amazing again. The third layer is infrastructure. And infrastructure is something that while we catalyze, we don't put our own money in, but again, it's really critical to drive change. For example, if I take agriculture, we are supporting the rollout of soil testing through satellite imagery, and then ground truthing it with local data on soil quality. The cost of that is literally magnitude lower to do this soil health, getting soil health cards this way. And actually the quality also of the soil health cards are much superior than if you do wet chemistry testing. So it sounds counterintuitive, but actually if you take the soil from a piece of land and do testing through wet chemistry, you don't get great results. So this is an example of saying you need to get in, sorry, my mistake, that's a technology. I'm giving you the wrong example. But it's a technology example. If I move to infrastructure, it's more like in financial inclusion, you need mobile telephony, you need internet connections. Without that, you can't have payment banks working too well, right? You need roads, for example. Actually, roads may have done more for farmers than anything else, all the rural roads we built, because it connects them to markets. And a lot of the analysis we see is that's as big a driver as, for example, irrigation in agriculture. So similarly, in this field, the infrastructure really is the building of the FSTPs, right? We might enable it, the government will pay for it, and I think that will happen in India with all the work you're doing. I think the infrastructure will get built, the NSS infrastructure. The challenge is, as we know, it's more than infrastructure, it's a service business. So I think the three main pillars for WASH, which is the policies, the technologies, and the infrastructure, I feel that all the partners we have here will do a great job of enabling government to get this done. A lot of progress has already been made. It's the last two areas, which is applications and behavior change, which is actually the toughest and the most intensive. But you need it to actually get systems going at scale. So a policy often is stroke of the pen, you write it, it's done. But the challenge with applications and behavior change is that it needs to reach everyone, and therefore it's challenging. So an application, for example, and I'll give you an example from health. We've been working for many years in TB to get an application rolling, which is an ICT application which will get patients on TB to do everything from diagnostics to reminding them to treatment, to reminding them to take the drugs, to issuing free, to issuing slips that will get them free drugs from any chemist, etc., etc. So it's a comprehensive system which we worked for many years, and literally last week the government of India chose to adopt it, right? So we are very excited. It's just one example of our application, but the challenge of this application is that you can get this system in, it's an application, but it actually has to work in every state, in every city, in every locality, and that really is the challenge, right? So it's never easy rolling out applications, and that is the challenge you now face, right? The application for you is, how do you get the application as a citywide sanitation plan. After you have that plan, you actually have to get the government to roll it, work with the government, support them to roll it out. And that's where all the service delivery comes in. And that's where it's challenging. And the last one is really the behavior change, which is all the communication you spoke about yesterday. And I think if you really want to have a movement going, today FSM is in the hearts and minds of all of you here, and a few committed government officials in a few cities and in a few state ministries, right? But it's not a public issue. You know, as the example yesterday of Sunita that you all highlighted, it's pollution, air pollution is a public issue. And it's only when it becomes a public issue that really we'll find that FSM takes off without the intensity of us needing to drive it in every state with the kind of intensity we are doing today in the 5 states that we are working in. So that's how we think of it. And coming from this, in a way, abstracted example, coming back to saying what do we need to do here, to recap what I was saying is there are 2 challenges. The first challenge is how do you get your 200 kind of cities going with co-treatment, FSTPs, and the services that you need to get done there. And the second is how do you amplify. In the first one, I just highlight that the challenges are pretty large even for the first, and the reason I say that is the way you work there is that you will not have just the bodies to go into all 200 cities, and therefore you would have to work with government to set up good mechanisms, good MIS to know what's working, what's failing, and have feedback mechanisms to drive change. And while we were in a pilot mode, we didn't have to do this at great intensity. So that's why, you know, even yesterday I was making the point that it's going to be much more difficult and much more challenging. And to me, this is one big area, right? That's different. The second area where it's different is that we shouldn't feel that we have the answer, that we've done these pilots, we know how co-treatment works, we know how money is going to be collected either through tax or that we'll do it through regular desludging and etc., etc. We just have to have an open mind that says as we scale, we will learn and course correct as we learn, because when you scale, you might find 50 more challenges you've never thought of today. And I think we have to have that open mind to say the crux is how we learn as we scale, as opposed to we know the answer. So I'll just highlight these 2 themes about successful scaling in the 200 cities. The next big challenge is how do we amplify and communicate. I won't focus so much on the communicate, because I think a large part of yesterday's sessions was on getting mass support for this kind of an issue. I'll focus more on the amplify. And on the Amplify, again, today there are sessions on institutional building, on capability building. The point I would highlight is that we will not have the luxury of having the same model in the rest of the country as we have in 5 states. And that is the real constraint, which is in these 5 states, we have PMUs, we have all of you there, your teams actually, and at the center also, driving and working with government to scale up in these 5 states. In the other states, we won't have it. So we have to think of innovative mechanisms of working with other states to getting them to take ownership of the problem. A simple example could be, and this is just a very crude example, but you'll have to think really expansively of the kind of solutions you want, is that there's a PMU that we say we have funded in each of these 5 states. But in many other areas, including in WASH, but in many areas of government's development, state governments hire or contract their own PMUs. So if you work with other state governments, would they be willing to contract their own PMUs? And then you support that PMU as opposed to, or we support those PMUs in terms of highlighting those PMUs, what we need to do next, and without putting up the own PMU. So this could be one example, but I think that's a very narrow example. The broad thing is how do you work across the country in terms of amplifying? And that really is the critical question. And I think if we can get these two right, there's no reason that, you know, we cannot literally in 5 to 7 years have FSM really scaled up across the country. And I can think of no better team than all the partners in this room to do it. I mean, I have full confidence that your teams can do it. So I want to thank you for all that you've done for FSM and sanitation. And it's a pleasure to be part of this team. Thank you so much.